This is cruel. It's not nice to play with my emotions like this. When Exquisite Timepieces in Florida asked me what watch I wanted to borrow for a video, I half-jokingly said, how about a Ressence? Ressence watches are kind of rare, they're pretty expensive. Exquisite was not going to agree to that. But damn it, they did, and they said, sure, let's get you something that you're excited about. And the cruelty of that is that I've always wanted one of these watches, and now I've gone from wanting to needing, and it's Exquisite Timepieces' fault, and I'll never forgive them. But also, thanks guys for making this video possible. In this video's description, there's a link to this watch on the Exquisite Timepiece website. Happy shopping. Maybe you know I'm into unusual watches, $400 or $400,000. If the watchmakers are doing something different, if they're experimenting, pushing boundaries, if they're creating something that's right on the line of a bad idea, I'm usually into it. And I think Ressence watches are right on that line, and depending on your taste and maybe your budget, Ressence could fall on either side of that line. Because these are not only weird, but expensive, possibly confusing, definitely unnecessary, but that never stopped us before. In fact, it's often had the opposite effect on me. The first time I heard of Ressence watches was in 2016 when Hodinkee did a Talking Watches episode with Tony Fadell. Tony showed his bizarre, oil-filled, handless watch that he called a Ressence Type 3. I'd never seen anything like that, and even 7 years later, outside of Ressence, I still haven't seen anything like that. And that's what I have right here today, a Ressence Type 3, but this one is updated from the one I saw what feels like a lifetime ago. Now, I don't believe in grail watches. I don't believe that a watch collector can buy a watch that's their final, ultimate goal. That's not how human brains work. But there is a watch that I love and I think about a lot, and maybe I could find it one day, and it is a Ressence watch. In 2022, Ressence collaborated with designer Alan Silberstein to make this Ressence Type 1. They only made 36 of them, and even at list price, it was about $25,000. And now I can't even find one. But there are so many parts of this watch that resonate with me on a very personal level, in a way that I'm not going to talk about here, that it feels close to a grail watch for me. And that's just all to say that I'm into Ressence watches, and also to say that if you have one of these, call me. Ressence was founded in 2010. Its watches are designed and engineered in Antwerp, Belgium, and they're built in Switzerland. And what all its watches have in common is that none of them have real hands and none of them have real crowns either. First of all, the hands are not actually hands, they're rotating discs. And they're all on separate axes. There's no concentricity, which is a word that I thought I was making up, but turns out is an actual word, concentricity. So I got that going for me, which is nice. And then all of these discs kind of act as planetary gears. That's a term in engineering for a gear like this. None of them are on the same axis. The result is awesomeness, in my opinion. I just love an unusual display of time. The traditional clock and watch layout is great, and we're all used to reading it, but I think it's a great place for artistic experimentation, and that's what I think Ressence is doing, experimenting. So what exactly is going on here? Because some of this you can probably guess about, and some I didn't even understand at first, and maybe I still don't really understand. The largest hand is the minutes hand. You probably got that part. The second largest hand, or disc, is the hour hand. And then around the periphery of the dial, no, not a dial, around the periphery of the watch is the date, and it's read from the orange triangle at what is usually the 6 o'clock end of the dial. Okay, now the disc that has these 7 white segments, where 2 are surrounded by orange, that's your day of the week reading. The 2 segments that are surrounded by orange, that's the weekend. And the hand on that disc not only indicates the day of the week, but also AM or PM by pointing to the beginning or the end of the line segments. Now, the smallest hand disc thing is a runner. It's mostly just to indicate that the watch is running. It's not a seconds hand because it makes a full rotation only every 360 seconds, so 1 degree per second, I guess. That's fine. Okay, finally, the disc with the red and blue segments. That, my friends, is the oil temperature. I'm not joking. That indicates the temperature of the oil inside this watch because this watch is filled with oil. And the oil inside this watch is not for lubrication purposes, but for legibility. Oil makes this watch more readable. Go ahead, splash some oil onto your eyeballs right now. You'll be amazed at your new vision. Don't do that, that was a joke. What the oil in this watch does is remove something called parallax, and basically, because of light refraction, it makes it look like all of the discs are actually printed on the surface of the crystal. I'm not sure if I can capture this in the video, but in the hand, it is a wild effect. This also means that you can see the display perfectly from any angle. There are dive watches that do this for similar reasons, legibility at nearly any angle. But on a watch with this design that's built like a bubble, it's an entirely different experience and a very, very cool one. The watch case is 44mm wide and 14mm thick. From lug to lug, it's about 50mm long. It has 30 meters of water resistance and it comes on a black leather strap. And before some of you start complaining about the 44mm or the 30 meters of water resistance, you weren't going to buy this anyway because this watch costs $44,000, so just enjoy the video. But for those of you who do have the budget and the interest, I'll tell you that I like this size. Maybe because it doesn't have a bezel or crown guards or even a crown at all. On my 7-inch wrist, it seems right. And with a 50mm length, you can wear this on much smaller wrists if you like that look. My only complaint about wearability is the bubbled design. The case back is as equally convex as the front, which means it looks and feels like it sits high on the wrist. Honestly, it's not a big deal, but it looks stranger than it feels. And what is going on with that case back? Well, that's where and how you set the watch. This is my main complaint with the watch, although the price is also something I have a problem with. Ressence has a very helpful video on how to set the watch by rotating the case back. And it did help me set the watch, but I'd need to view that video several times to absorb the information. Okay, that's not terrible, but what I really don't like is that most of the time setting has to be done in a specific order. First you set the AM/PM, then the date, then the time, then the day of the week. And all this means that if you need to adjust the time back a few hours, like if you just flew to a new time zone, you actually want to move the time forward until you reach that time of day. Otherwise, if you try to move the time backwards, you'll end up changing the day of the week, the AM, the date, all those things. I appreciate the crownless design, it's very clean, but setting the watch it kind of bums me out. And all of the engineering in this watch is done in a particularly wild way, partially because of the oil. The display is filled with oil, but much of the movement is not. So there's part of this watch, the dial, you could say, that's sealed off from the rest of the watch. That means that there are no gears or pinions that can cross that boundary into the dial part. So what Ressence uses are magnets. Magnets, how do they work? Usually you want to keep magnets away from a mechanical watch, but this thing is so customized by Ressence, so different from regular watches, that the physics that affect poor people do not apply here. I'm kidding. Well, maybe I'm not. Ressence has figured this out somehow. I don't know how. I'm not a magnet doctor. It's even more amazing that at the heart of this watch is actually an ETA 2824 movement. Or it might have started that way. Ressence only uses the minutes mechanism from the ETA movement. Everything else is custom. Very, very custom. There's really nothing like this thing. Nothing I've ever seen, at least. And I like different. Different, but still functional, especially. Because even though this is weird, I've had no problem reading the time. In fact, I find this more legible than many traditional watches. Ressence is solving a problem that nobody really had, but that's the case with just about every mechanical watch. Like I said, I have problems setting the watch, it's just too much. And the price is harder to swallow than the oil inside this piece, but still I want one of these, or one of several Ressence watches at least. And shame on Exquisite Timepieces for being an enabler. It's not nice, but also, thanks. This was a real treat for me, and I hope for all of you too.